It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining this panel, and also on behalf of the Skoll Foundation and Jeff Skoll, thank you for participating in this week. I hope it's been very productive and useful for everybody. We wanted to spend some time today talking about earned revenue models. I think sometimes there's an oversimplified view of how nonprofit or social enterprises can work in terms of lots of grant money, or you can be a for-profit impact organization and there's nothing in between. And I think a lot of us know there's a lot in between, and there's more and more available in between in terms of different kinds of financing opportunities depending on the organization, depending on where you operate, depending on your business model. And earned revenue is a very interesting way to not only compensate for grant funding, but also to access other kinds of financing that are available more and more. So we've assembled a really fantastic panel today. We have an operator, we have a foundation, and we have a commercial lending banker. I think we have some great perspectives here, so I wanted to be sure that we spend some time together talking about this. So let's introduce the panel. This is Philip Brown from Citi, Andrea Coleman from Riders for Health, and Jasper Snoek from DON, a foundation in the Netherlands. And welcome our panels. So I'm going to sit here just to break up the energy a little bit. I think it's very two-dimensional that way. And I don't mean you, I just mean the setup. So what I wanted to do first actually is understand who's in the room. So if you could give me by a show of hands, who works for a for-profit social enterprise here? A for-profit? And therefore a nonprofit? Who works for a nonprofit? Great. And how many of you on the nonprofit side have some kind of an earned revenue model? Great. So we have experts all over the room. That's great. And how many of you use that earned income, do you believe, as a way to make your financing structure more sophisticated? Has that helped you get in different kinds of financing that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise? Excellent. Excellent. That's great. Thanks. What are the questions that are burning for you? What do you want to make sure that we cover? We won't answer them right now, but I'd love to throw out a few questions that are on your mind so that we can orient our comments to the things that are really burning for you. So wake up and give me a couple of questions of things that are on your mind.
Yeah. Okay, how do we make sure that when employing an earned revenue model, we don't then cut out the very population we most want to reach?
Okay, great. Staying true to mission. Yep. Other questions? Yep.
How do you balance the risk of failing on the earned revenue model, bring down the organization versus the opportunity it provides to lift up?
Downside and upside. Great. Other questions, please?
Yeah, how do you avoid the moral capture of seeking a revenue stream? Once you're successful at doing it, how do you keep that from redirecting your mission?
How do you stay at the base of the pyramid? Right. Other questions? These are all great. Please.
In looking at distribution partnerships, like where's the line in terms of mission creep, and if you have like a partner who can help to extend your business model, how do you draw the lines on that?
Great. Please.
So getting in bed with an investor, how do you know he's a shark or a dolphin?
How do you get out of bed? Right. Excellent. Okay, these are exactly what I want to be talking about today. So, great. Well, thanks for that. So let's do introductions here. We don't want to do the resume version; those are in your program. So feel free if you want to know the background and titles and positions. But what I do want to understand a little bit about is what organization do you work for, and how does this interest you, and how do you approach financing for social enterprises? And let's start with Jasper.
Well, I work for the Tulane Foundation. We are a foundation that finances entrepreneurial initiatives in actually 3 areas. So we look at cultural innovation, we look at social innovation, and we look at what we would call environmental or sustainable innovation. Early stage, so we really tend to work at or start working with partners at a very early stage. We apply all kinds of financial instruments, so we do a lot of grants, debt, and equity. And social enterprises are, well, a large part of the population that we work with or that we serve. So that's with different instruments, different models, we really try to work with them in finding new models, in creating new ideas. So I think, well, being on this panel is quite a nice nice place to be and share some of that with you, and also listen to your experiences, because we're continuously learning. So we really try to see what we could do better, what we could do differently to further the mission even further. So.
And Jasmine, when you say social enterprise, is that a for-profit, a non-profit, or does it not make a difference to you?
Well, that's quite interesting for, let's say, from being here for these few days, that the definition of social enterprises, I think, is a very wide definition. So I think when I would look at the Netherlands and how we would perceive a social enterprise is completely different from the definition or the perception in the US, I think, or in the UK. We do, let's say, I think most of what we do is social enterprises, and we do everything. So we do for-profit, we do not-for-profit, and that's also why we can use equity to step in.
So for purposes of today's conversation, I'm going to try to lean things toward the nonprofit end of things. I think a conversation about for-profits and triple and double bottom line and impact investing is a great conversation. I think that's less useful in this particular context. We'll touch on it, but I think we should orient particularly towards charitable organizations, nonprofits, or their equivalents, and how to do financing around those. So Andrea Coleman from Riders, welcome. Tell us a bit about how you see financing social enterprises.
Yes, well, Andrea Coleman from Riders for Health. We run and manage transportation to deliver healthcare at last mile level in 7 African countries. We try to make our income stream as diverse as possible. So we try, try to earn as much money as we possibly can. But of course, all social enterprises are notoriously and undercapitalized. So it's very difficult to get yourself, up off the bottom to try to make sure that you have the income that you need. And of course, as the organization grows, the financial and capital needs grow with it. So your sort of day-to-day running costs are very difficult to access, but where we're working with innovative capital is on our financing the vehicles that we run and manage in the field. So, but we really do try and keep it as diverse as possible. So we're not just earning money in Africa from our partners, but also earning money in putting on events and so on, so that we're not just donor dependent all the time, but we end up being just as donor dependent as so many others anyway.
So, as the only one on the panel who actually has to earn your living, we'll come to you in a second, Philip. What are the 2 or 3 or 4 major buckets of revenue that Riders is currently accessing?
Well, we do earn money in the UK, Europe, and America by working on motorcycle racing events to earn income. So that's quite a large income stream for us. And then we have grants from the Skoll Foundation and from the Gates Foundation and some others. And also we earn. We charge the government, the ministries of health that we work with, what we call a cost per kilometre, so that everybody is paying for the fuel, the parts, the labour, and so on. But what's different about that model with working with ministries of health is that our bottom line, as it were, is the same as the ministries of health. So we're not looking for profit from them. We're looking at being able to make their money work much harder, but to reach the people in rural communities. We want to do what they want to do, but also we have to make sure that we don't end up trying to pay for all the transport for all the ministries of health across Africa. So we have to charge for that, but we try and do it in a way that starts to make them less donor dependent and to move them away from expecting an NGO like ours to come in with money, but we're coming in with services and core competence rather than with money. So it's really difficult to shift people's minds away from the old models of NGO dependence, donor dependence in Africa. So it's really something that we're doing to shift their thinking somewhere else, as well as shifting our ability to earn money. So it's grants, earned income in the developed world, earned income in the field programs.
Great. We'll come back to this and understand how you've built this over some time. But I also want to welcome Philip Brown from Citi. Thank you for joining us, Philip. Philip has an incredibly deep experience in micro lending and other parts of creative financing for social enterprises, for-profit and nonprofit. So tell us your take on this quickly by way of introduction, and thanks for being here.
Well, I'm Philip Brown. I'm the risk director of Citi Microfinance, and I think Alex asked me to describe my role, and I'd in Skoll jargon I call it a sort of an entrepreneur and an enabler, because we're within Citi, which is obviously a large commercial global bank. We're effectively sort of change makers in terms of starting with a blank sheet of paper and saying how can we actually service the needs of microfinance institutions and inclusive business, which obviously includes social enterprise. I mean, I would like to, I sort of describe my role as turning crumbs into a loaf, because it's very much a question of putting in place the policies, the programs, the risk tools, the risk sharing agreements that facilitate onboarding and supporting names that otherwise wouldn't, fall within our the sort of standard target market. The Citi overall, we've been around for 200 years. We're in over 100 countries. So that we're very much dealing with, from a Citi Microfinance standpoint, we're like a specialist group working across the bank's businesses, the investment bank, corporate bank, commercial bank, consumer bank, etc., private bank in those various countries. So that what we're doing in Kenya, or what we do in Honduras, or what we do in Kinshasa, or wherever, is very much driven by the local business. So it's a question of supporting them to actually include. So my role, if you like, our role is really, we're in the inclusion business. We're in the inclusion business in terms of working with institutions to include, provide access to, hopefully, people that are underserved or underbanked, but also including those institutions themselves into sort of mainstream funding. And that goes, historically, just to give a sort of flavour for it, there are lots of institutions that we've worked with that started off as NGOs and have converted to non-bank finance companies and are now reasonably sized banks. And I just come back from Peru last weekend and called on Mi Banco, which is one of our clients there. And Mi Banco, started off going back in time. Axion, which is a microfinance network, had a bridge fund, and I believe when we issued a standby letter of credit to support the funding of the NGO. And now, it's a bank with 1.8 billion balance sheet and 500,000 clients, and etc. So, likewise, if you looked at Compartamos in Mexico, which is another microfinance bank now, that started off as an NGO and has transformed. And along the way, we provided transaction services to them to help, to actually collect from the ladies, when they're making payments into the Banamex network, to provide originally straight funding, then private placement, then a wrap bond issue. As they went up, graduated up the scale, then a bond issue, and then were part of the IPO that happened. So we're very much about starting small and growing large.
That's great. Thank you for the introductions. In one sentence, please, what's your biggest frustration with financing social enterprises, Jasper? Biggest frustration for you?
That some are still, have fallen into the trap of, I think, grant dependency. That's really my biggest frustration.
Okay. Andrew, what's your biggest frustration in financing social enterprises?
I think it's just finding the right kind of money. It's just not easy to tailor what's out there, even though there's a proliferation of what are called impact investors, just to find the right kind of money at the right time.
Great, and that's going to be the whole point of our conversation today. Philip, what drives you crazy in this process?
Lots of things.
Yeah.
Obviously, size is one of the key problems, because there's this mismatch between what people want to do versus how large they actually are. The actual business model, I mean, the business strategy, being clarity over it, and the point that Jasper was just making in terms of, you know, are they actually looking on the grant side? Are they looking for to be commercial? So it's clarity around the business model as to what they actually want to be. The other thing is actually what I call mainstream linkages. So that they're actually working with maybe governments or as providers for health, or with mainstream corporate clients, not just living in their own little ecosystem.
Right, that's great. So we internally at Skoll, when we were putting this panel together, we called this the Color of Money panel. We also called it the Suitable Capital for the Right Stage of Capital panel, which were not great titles, we didn't use them. But to give you a sense of what we're trying to get at here in terms of the suitability of certain kinds of capital for organizations at different stages and different models and different parts of the organization. So we'll dig into this. So Andrea, I assume that when you and your wonderful husband Barry started this organization in what year?
1991.
Okay, so I assume you had a fully built out and vetted business plan that anticipated exactly what you would do over time,
Absolutely.
all the requirements that you would have by stage, and you had laid out your capital requirements with bankers who were standing by at all stages,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, no
Okay.
problem with
So
that.
if I don't have that quite right, would you give me a sense of like, how did the financing, the business itself is fascinating, and I encourage you to look at Ryder's website and understand them. It's a really neat business, and yes, I'm biased as an investor. But how did the financing piece of this develop for you? Did you have some anticipation, some visibility on what you would need, or have you discovered or have new things arisen that were not available in prior years that have facilitated the financing growth of Riders? How's the story of the financing of Riders progressed?
Well, it's a very interesting question. On year 4 of Riders for Health, I decided that what we needed was a business plan. And I had to start, I went out and got a book because I had no idea what a business plan was or how to start one. So that was year 4. So year 1, we knew what we wanted to do, and because we didn't have an international development background or any information about that world,
Your technical background, was it exactly what?
What do you mean?
Motorcycle racing.
Oh, motorcycle racing. Yes, that was my background. So I wasn't entirely prepared. But we knew what we wanted to do. We knew that what I believed, as I was responsible for getting the money, was that nobody was going to give us money for what we did. So I put together events. Actually, the first event was in Holland, in Northern Holland, where we did auctions and so on to capitalise the money. And we started with £13,000, and we started in the Gambia. So that was a long time ago. And our principle at the time was we'd get as much money as we could, and we'd just spend it. And the real financial principle was we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to find the money somehow. So that was how we started. But gradually you learn you have to be much more sophisticated than that, turns out. And so we've gradually learned how to earn more money. But we're at a very interesting point in Riders for Health. At one end of the spectrum, we're really talking about very sophisticated financial models and thinking about innovation of financial models. And at the other end, we're still trying to find, the $5,000 and to keep us going at the other end of the spectrum. It's a very interesting financial picture.
And how have the revenue models are important for diversifying your revenue streams, but they also allow different kinds of financing to be available because you now have a particular kind of or geographically located revenue stream. Can you talk about a little bit, before we talk to the financing people, about how has the earned revenue model in certain circumstances within riders allowed you to access different kinds of capital? Certainly if you're selling something or raising money in that way, that's helping. But if that also has a knock-on effect of being able to raise additional financing because of that revenue model, that's interesting as well, and I think quite useful. So how are you accessing additional capital raising because of the earned revenue model?
Well, the way we actually started working with Ministries of Health was that they had vehicles and we would maintain them and manage them, the vehicles that they owned, which has a lot of drawbacks. And the way we charge for that is on a cost per kilometre basis, so that we're charging them invoicing them on a quarterly basis. But then the way that we migrated that was to own the vehicles, which meant that that you could take the vehicles out of service when they got to be expensive, probably on year 4, somewhere between year 4 and year 5. This is motorcycles, ambulances and other vehicles needed in the health system. And so we were able to look at the assets as a collateral base, but until we understood a financial model that would work, we borrowed money from a Nigerian bank, Guarantee Trust Bank of Nigeria, and the Skoll Foundation de-risked that for the bank. So what that did for us was to create a track record that we were able now to show to people and say, this is how it's worked, and we've been able to pay back on this. Nevertheless, in unstable environments like the Gambia and so many African countries, the economic picture is unstable, the political picture, the social picture is unstable. So we have to think of all sorts of ways of de-risking loans, but nevertheless it's always a very interesting discussion about the interest rates.
And can you give us a little bit of the structure of what does that loan look like? What is the rate? What is the term? Like, what are you having to deal with here?
Well, we borrowed $3.5 million from the bank, from the Guarantee Trust Bank, and Skoll Foundation underwrote that loan, makes sure that the bank knows that it's okay. And in the first place, as Edina will tell you, they wanted to charge us 27% interest. And
The bank, not they, Skoll.
no. You see how they do really well out of us. We actually managed to get them down to a 3% interest rate because that was because of Skoll. Skoll de-risked it. Yeah, absolutely. So
and we de-risked it not through a grant.
No, not through a grant. Right. Absolutely not. No, this was Skoll working with the bank, not working with riders. So, and also
just a guarantee, was it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is in the process and will be paid back. So from a Skoll point of view, this is not a grant, this was a loan guarantee that then will be paid back over time. So we'll actually get our money back on that.
Yeah,
and so that's a program-related investment from a foundation as opposed to just a grant. And we'll come to Jasper in just a second here on.
So do you have to put money up to guarantee, or could you just put your assets
What
up?
is the structure on it? This is Ed Diener, counsel for the Skoll Foundation.
It depends upon the situation. In this particular case, it was vastly simpler for the bank for us to put up cash collateral so they didn't have to use their deposit base in a small country for this rather sizable transaction. In other environments, an array of collateralization techniques can be used, from standby letters of credit to various other pledge instrumentalities. But in this case, it was the simplest thing to do to provide the money.
But they're now much more comfortable with it, and for the next phase, they're willing to look at our assets, the signed contract from the Ministry of Health, and to use that as a de-risking mechanism rather than getting the mechanism that we've used with Skoll. So it's building up your track record and showing that you can really work in that way and work with a commercial bank. But of course, it's always difficult as well in Africa because their central banks will only let them loan what they've got. So you know, it's not as easy as it is working with massive banks in the developed world.
So Jasper, you tend to work with organizations at an earlier stage, and you've coming from where your organization operates a more flexible kind of financing available than perhaps a commercial bank would have. And Philip, you can tell us about that in a second. But
I'm always flexible.
as long as there's no risk.
Let's see.
We have to structure that.
Now we're talking about downside protection again. Jasper, give us your comments on Andrea's general situation here and the ability of social enterprises to earn revenue, which is a good thing, and also to access capital. And how do you play in that space? How does Donen get involved there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very known story. I think we come across organizations like Riders for Health quite often, so who start with a great idea, have very specific knowledge or skills and a very bright idea. They really want to change the world. They want to change the world for the better. And really have to sort of get onto this path of finding their way into an unknown world. So that's I think we see that very often. So what we do, we can use any financial instrument. So what typically would happen is that we would start with somebody with a grant. We would provide a grant. Could be hybrid, could be a grant with a loan, but it sort of would migrate. So we would sort of work with the organization to see what kind of instruments would be feasible at a certain stage. So it really depends on the request we receive. So if somebody approaches us, we have cases where people approach us, please provide us with a loan. And in the end, we decide, okay, we will give you a grant. Because if we look at your picture, if we look at your, let's say, your cash flow, you will never be able to support a loan. So why would we burden you with a loan? We did it in the past, and it always turns out to what you actually expected at first. So it doesn't make sense. In other cases, people come to us and say, okay, please give us a grant. We really need a grant. And when we look at the model, we think, come on, there isn't a revenue model in there. So we will provide you with a loan because you have repayment capacity and you should be able to build up a track record. So I think...
What's your interest in that? I mean, are you looking to maximize return? Are you after impact? Like, why would you make a decision of a grant versus a loan? What are you trying to get out of these different transactions?
Yeah, well, we have a very simple philosophy. We say, okay, when needed, we will provide grants. When possible, we will provide loans and take equity stakes. So we really look at the business itself.
Sorry, but why is that? Why the
because
difference?
I think, our money is scarce, so our resources are scarce. Okay. There's a lot of people out there who could use this money very well. So for us, granting it would mean that we will give it to a specific purpose and it's gone. If we would lend it to somebody, it would come back to us and we could use it again. So that's really why we do it.
Great.
And same with equity stakes. Okay, we will not discuss for-profits here, but it's the same reasoning. So we can just make money out of this money and use it for other social enterprises. So,
do you evaluate impact or other than financial return possibilities?
We look at impact, mm-hmm. and then we look at financial return.
Okay.
So it's really like the impact is for us the most important. If we don't see social, environmental or cultural impact, we will not even touch it. So people can approach us and say, okay, I have this very interesting proposition, 30% return guaranteed. Not showing any impact, we will not even consider it. 100%, we wouldn't care. So the financial return is really secondary. We want to see financial sustainability, so that's really what we're looking for. We want to see...
Sorry, what does that mean exactly?
Normally how we come in is either with 1-year grant or a 3-year support, and we would really like to see these organizations become sustainable after a while. And I think part of this sustainability is financial sustainability. So we should be able to see sustainability also from the financial side, so that there will be...
Does that mean no more grant funding ever? Does that mean profitable?
No.
Okay.
It could be a combination, so or it could be grants. But we always start the conversation, realize that we will be with you for a while, and we will leave you after a while. So from moment one, we will explain very clearly, realize that we will not be with you forever. So start working on other sources of funding.
So does
be it grants,
just don't have to deal with you anymore?
Yeah, also. No, well, that they can sustain themselves without our support.
Without your support?
Yeah.
But not necessarily without loans or grants or donations?
No, absolutely not. No.
Okay.
No.
Interesting. I never know what sustainability means, so I have to push at this. So,
is it clear now?
So what currency, if they are in Africa, what currency do they borrow at?
What currency? Yeah, Andrea, how have you handled currency risk?
Well, we deal with in Dalasi in the local currency.
And has that been an issue for you?
It's getting to be. I look at Ed here as I speak. No, at the moment we have difficulty with it, that the interest rate is fluctuating a lot and not at the moment in our favour. But nevertheless, you have to build that into your model all the way across. And I mean, that's part of the risk, and that's why it is difficult working in developing the developing world, because it's more fragile in that way.
Let me just ask your financing partner, Ed Diener, do we have currency concerns in these kinds of transactions?
Well, we do, because in frontier markets, there isn't a way to buy instruments from the likes of the Philips of the world to de-risk your currency exposures. And so it depends upon your institutional philosophy. I'd be very interested in hearing what Jasper has to say about this. But ours has been that we don't make the recipient organizations, such as riders, take risks that they actually cannot control. So they have the execution risks, but we will take the risk of local currencies against major currencies. And in a theoretical world, you could be paid for that.
But the problem is that when you're dealing with contracts with public agencies for public services that are targeting poor people, those public sector agencies do not have the money to keep up with local currency erosion against major currencies based upon external events. So the answer is that there's going to be some inherent risk associated with it, which is why you have to make sure that they are impact-oriented opportunities.
Great. Philip, let me drag you into this conversation here. I understand MFIs, microfinance institutions. I understand microcredit. I understand spreading the risk on a microcredit facility around many, many small loans that should be paid back and actually oftentimes are very well paid back. I get that part. Yeah. That's the sort of one-to-many part. I understand commercial financing of for-profits that have an asset base and an upside. I don't understand why you do or do not get involved with financing social enterprises as organizations that have a business model like Riders or others. So why and how do commercial banks get involved in this space?
Okay. Well, to start off with, I mean, banks are like dogs, if you like. Or not, if you.
I think I should agree with that.
No, precisely. No, I thought you'd like that one. Because if you think about banks, if you take a greyhound or something, you know, all greyhounds are dogs, but not all dogs are greyhounds. So I mean, every bank, as it were, has different characteristics. So the local bank in Gambia, you know, is a local bank in Gambia.
It's Nigerian.
Nigeria, is it? Sorry, okay. Whereas in Citibank is Citibank. So it's first of all, it's a question of the bank, and looking at the bank. I mean, that bank has a target base of clients that it's looking to target. It has a range of products that it's providing. It has, in turn, has its business plan. So the first thing is, to what extent is, you know, the enterprise or social enterprise you're looking to set up aligned with, you know, the interests of that bank. In terms of banking, I mean, we've been talking here about credit and about funding, but banking is much broader than that. So that when we're dealing with social enterprises, we're starting off with transaction services, just a basic banking account, and moving from basic banking as basically as businesses develop to supported credit, which is what we're talking about in terms of Riders for Health with Skoll support or with OPIC support, to then move to a standalone, fully, you know, a name that stands up and washes its face in terms of balance sheet and returns.
That's great. So tell me a little bit more about an example of when organizations can step into that ability to borrow, and what are you looking for? What is the profile of a social enterprise in the developing world? Let's go beyond the sort of local country bank, but the more international institutions that you represent. When do they become attractive?
Well, in terms of attractive to whom? Because obviously beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. In terms of as I mentioned before, it really depends on the institution that one's dealing with. So in our case, it's very much, our footprint varies from country to country as to the degree to which we go right down to the bottom. So in Mexico, we might actually finance a farmer, but in Kinshasa, we might only finance corporate names. So it's very broad. But the range of institutions is very large. I mean, the names in places like in Bangladesh, I mean, for instance, with BRAC, is the world's largest NGO. I mean, so it goes at that level, down to basically small entities that are just starting off and that just have a straight banking relationship.
That's great. Jasper, tell us a little bit about the kinds of revenue streams and assets that you're looking for that help you understand whether a grant or a loan makes more sense. How are you assessing the diversification of revenues and the financeability of a social enterprise?
Well, I think first we look at how realistic the projections are. That's always an interesting one because people have high aspirations and have flexible Excel sheets normally. So we see all kinds of hockey sticks and, extrapolated revenue streams. So we first try to get a sense, is this realistic? Does this really work? Do we believe in this revenue stream? If we do, then we just look at the cash flow. Are they able to support a loan, to repay it, to pay interest? What would be the best structures? Or do we do a bullet, so only at the end of the loan a repayment? Do we give them a period, let's say two-year grace period where they don't have to repay? It really depends on the streams that we see. So if we see enough potential or ability to pay, we would structure it accordingly. And otherwise we would really recommend them, please, let us give you a grant, because this will not work. You will really take a burden on yourself which you will drag on forever and, might end you up in a situation where you're worse off than you were when you started working with this.
Andrew,
so really,
what do the bankers just not get? What do you bang your head against the wall about after meeting with bankers or financing partners? And if you could take their job over, what would you change about it?
God, I wouldn't want their job. I think that inflexibility, of course, a bank has to be stable. I mean, they're going to, that's what their customers want. But when we first put the proposition that we have in the Gambia to the bank, GT Bank, they thought they really did think we were crazy. They said, we're just not interested in this. But over time, they changed their minds. They said they were willing to do it. And I think one of the things about what social enterprise is trying to do is actually change people's minds about the way things are done. And I'm really interested in what Jasper says, in that what Doon is also trying to do, as well as look at how any given social enterprise might operate and can pay back or not, is really to change everybody's way in NGOs and so on of doing the work, to try and make money work differently for them, because we can't all be donor dependent. And then for us, it's really important to try and change the way banks or ministries of health or anybody else is actually thinking about what they do. Development hasn't changed. 50 years of development hasn't changed Africa. So we've got to make the money that's available work differently, and doing the same old thing isn't going to work. So I think it's incumbent upon us all to try and look at how money works and do it differently. So I think my frustration when I'm talking to people about money is just not being willing to think about doing it differently. Let's sit together and think about new ways of doing it that might work for everybody. And I think we're all going to have to do that, because the big money out there isn't really getting to the people who really need it. And one of the excuse me, because this may be completely irrelevant to what you're saying, the question you're asking me. But actually, one of the things that really concerns us is that there's a lot of discussion around microfinance and bottom of the pyramid, but actually building SMEs and the sort of, as it were, blue-collar element of Africa, which of course is our interest, is not there. So unless you think about how to make money work differently, and to start thinking about how you're going to build business, you know, SMEs and so on, you're never going to work out of development, so work out of poverty and change the landscape. So I just think there's not enough thinking around how you make the money work to build all the levels of society, rather than just at the bottom or the macro stuff right at the top. You know, people are going to have to start thinking about that.
So Philip, I bet you're thinking about that.
Yes, definitely.
How would you get a more sophisticated financing environment?
There are a number of different themes that come out of here, and I'll come back to it. But I think in terms of this building the SME business, I think it's a question of the percentage of people that are actually employed in the formal economy. Because one of the issues in a lot of these countries is that the actual percentage of the population that's in the formal economy is in formal employment, you know, is very limited. So I mean, the building businesses, you know, is a very important part of doing things. But if I could just come back to this question of sort of banks and bank relationships, because one of the things that there's a bit frustrating is that I think. I mean, from a client standpoint, they do have to understand that they need to build a relationship with the bank, you know, to build a understanding, and so we understand the business and get involved, and then come up with sort of, not innovative necessarily, but I mean, look at how one can structure things to actually achieve what your business plan is. The problem is that a lot of it, and the discussion around, you know, funding is a bit like filling up your car. You know, you're driving along and you think, oh, I need some petrol. You know, where's the next filling station? And you just sort of go to the bank to say, you know, give me a loan. And then I haven't got one from that one. I'll go to another one. So it's part of building a broader relationship, not just a one-off, you know, fill up your car exercise.
How does one do that? How do I get your attention and build a relationship with you when I'm a year or two away from needing you? Will you take my call? Can we meet? How do we actually build the relationship with you and your kind, so that conversation can actually happen?
It's quite simple, because I mean there's an existing client base, you know, of the bank. So the bank involved in this case, you know, it may have a relationship with the Ministry of Health. It may have a relationship. So it actually comes in through generally through being part of an ecosystem, as it were. You know, clients. The bank has certain clients, and this new entity, you know, is dealing with those clients. So it's not just a sort of like a man from Mars that just sort of walks in the door and, you know, you know.
I recognize some of Philip says. What we see is that, let's say, our partners start approaching financiers when their tank is empty, and you should really start approaching them when your tank is still full. So start building.
Take the phone call is the problem.
Well, it shouldn't. It doesn't have to be open an account, just a normal account. You don't ask for a loan. Just start a relationship. You will have somebody taking care of you. You will just. It's a very time-consuming and sometimes frustrating business, I think, but it's necessary. It's enlarging your ecosystem. And when you start with that too late, it just doesn't make sense. You know, if you stumble into an office and say, okay, I need $1 million now because I'm running out of money, I'm almost there. You need to help me. We also get these requests. It's not a good starting point. It just takes time to build a relationship. It takes time to understand what somebody's doing. It takes time to sort of get their model. So you really have to spend time on that. I think you have to invest in it. You have to open yourself up to this world, which might be a different world than you work with normally. But I think it's essential in sort of progressing your social enterprise.
we are talking about funding a company. If you see, if you want to scale up the BOP, if you fund a company, the company has to go with a market infrastructure. And if we fund market infrastructure, then the companies, all the companies can be efficient. Nobody wants to fund distribution channels, nobody wants to fund all the things that, let's say if you say Apple makes money, who created the internet? If nobody created internet, there's no Apple. But now there's the BOP is such that nobody creates the internet, nobody creates the market infrastructure, and they only want to get the sex, which is this company makes money or not. So I think you have to build the bed and all that first, right?
You know, but it's so hard to if you've got a new idea, banks simply won't talk to you. I mean, we don't do that. And we've had that discussion time and time again.
Did you account with the Bank of Gambia prior to this conversation?
Not with the Guaranteed Trust Bank, no, we didn't. I mean, to be fair, it's easier to start a discussion with a bank in Africa just because you're more likely to be able to walk through the door and talk to the person in charge right away than you are here. But I think that it's very hard to put forward a new idea to an entity that has the rules and regulations and we do it this way, and for them to start thinking about a new way of doing something. Once we have a track record, it's much easier to go and talk to them. And that's why it's so important that an organisation like the Skoll Foundation helps us with that, so that we're able to build a track record that you can then take, that you're going to get taken more seriously and have more of an alignment with the sort of regular banking rules. But I just think they need to think more. As things get more and more difficult financially, I think banks are going to have to be more open to innovative ideas that people are bringing in and be more innovative themselves. I think it's going to have to happen.
My question is about the market infrastructure. For you, anybody wants to go into the market, there's no road, there's no distribution channel, there's no storage point, there's no fuel station. If nobody builds market infrastructure, then you keep on financing, and then these are high risk. But once the market is facilitated more, then the risk goes down. So can Skoll or any big organization bring businesses together to build market infrastructure? Otherwise, the industry will be it's like you're pulling your handbrake and you're driving your car with a lot of petrol consumption.
Yeah, that's a good question. Andrea, I wanted to understand whether you view financing riders as one big pot of money that you have to balance your income and outflows, or do you have little pieces? Do you have divisions? Do you have countries? Do you have programs? And do you finance those, in a sense, individually? And do you have different kinds of financing abilities and risks and needs in a program versus the organization, overhead versus a particular program that you're doing? Does it break down, or is it really all just one big bucket?
No, we have to keep, I suppose it's sort of like portfolio. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So no, we look at each program individually, and each one has its own different needs, and we have to operate the finances differently in each one. But now that we've operated what's we call the Transport Asset Management Program that we've been running in the Gambia, that's the one we want to scale and to move into other geographies, because it has the potential to do that.
So do you talk about the sustainability or the independence of a particular project or program that on its own? And Jasper, is that a meaningful distinction to you? Do you see the individual projects or programs of an organization as individual financing opportunities?
Well, I think if you want to build a track record and you sort of want to open up to new opportunities, financing opportunities, one model that we have done now with two of our partners in the Netherlands, I must say, so not internationally, is that we were supporting a foundation. The foundation had some earning capacity, so there was some revenue capacity in the foundation, in let's say just the things they did. So one was actually training people with autism to do software testing. And the other one was a car sharing initiative. So a guy who just put his car into a pool and said, okay, you can just use my car. Both of them have actually changed their model. So they've set up a limited next to it. We were actually not that willing to invest in a limited because we don't want to have an equity portfolio of 1,000 companies. So we said, okay, we want to continue the grant relationship that we have, but then let's structure it this way that the foundation becomes a shareholder in the limited.
And the limited is a for-profit.
The limited is a for-profit. Mm-hmm. So the foundation became in one case, the 40% shareholder of the limited, was able to attract other investors in the limited, so attracted new capital, build a revenue model there, and was able to attract bank loans while sort of securing that if any income would be generated, any surplus income, 40% of that would plow back into the foundation, which was our purpose and their purpose in life in the first place.
Do the investors get taken care of first, or does the 41% nonprofit owner get taken care of first?
No, they get taken care of at the same time. So it was one class of shares. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually quite an interesting model. So if you have a revenue capacity, if you want to attract other financiers to come in, be it loans, be it equity, this is a model that could work quite well. Of course, you have to have a capacity to generate revenue. That's, of course, the starting point. But in this case, they trained the people and they just set up a commercial business that just does software testing. So it's a commercial business. It operates in the market. It offers highly skilled people that cannot be distracted to test software, which is, I think, a great advantage. And it works very well. So they have really big clients. They have big insurance companies that they test for. They have the national television service that uses their services. So it's really an interesting model. And with the other one, with the car sharing, they were able to, in the limited that they set up, to buy 200 cars. So now we have a fleet of 200 cars, which is owned by the limited, which is financed by a bank. And still within the foundation, it's the sharing and the doing things together philosophy, which is completely there. So it's really a nice mix, I think, of and also a nice setup to sort of put the risk where the financier wants the risk to be. So I think that's a model that I would like to see more. I think that would work well.
Yeah.
I was just curious to switch off financing for 1 second to the people. So I work for Salesforce Foundation, and one of the issues that we have a revenue model. So we're selling Salesforce where all the money goes back into the foundation. But our issue is really more around people. I mean, so the money part's sort of one side of it. But our challenge is when we're operating a commercial enterprise that has an earned revenue model for the foundation is actually paying people well, retaining people, attrition. So I just wondered if you could comment on, and even finding people that have the right ethical thinking, but still have the jobs that we need them to do, which are very for-profit, sometimes sales jobs, but they need to do it with a not-for-profit frame of mind. So any just comment about the people that you hire, how you try to attract and retain people? Maybe somebody else wants to comment on that for their own revenue model.
I'm looking at Alex. Do you want us to answer that
As you like.
now?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you like.
Yes. So are you addressing that to me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay. We employ more than 300 people in our African programs, and of course we think that the key to good staff is to try to pay them as well as you possibly can, but also making sure that you're talent spotting all the time to look at who is doing well and can you as it were, have a career path for them, and to think about them and what they want to do, but to also make very clear in our Africa programs, it's very good for our staff because although they're people who do a greasy hands job, they're actually part of the health system. So it's a very inspiring thing for them to do. So that's one side of it. But from the point of view of the people who work for Rights of Health in the UK, I think that being very clear about your mission and sticking to it, and making sure that you are being fair about how you employ them, I think that's a good thing. We found we were told that we should base our business in London because we'd never get good staff. Well, we're way out in the countryside and we have great staff, and people want to travel and work for riders, because I suppose they know that we're doing something important and changing things. So that's how we get our staff, really.
So, Philip, I wanted to ask you, I guess you've read one or two business plans in your career. What are the fundamentals in the business planning for a social enterprise that ideally are done ahead of time or usually not done ahead of time? But what's the advice for social entrepreneurs that are trying to build a business plan, look forward, understand their revenue potential and also their financing potential? What's the thing that's missing or that you wish that would be put into business plans that is not often there?
There are two parts that are very important. One is the actual sort of clarity around what the mission is, what the purpose is, and understanding, what you are and what you're not, in that sense, and clarity in terms of where you want to go, in terms of what is the real outreach that you want to achieve. Is it just obviously you tend to, obviously fall into things a bit here, because when you started, you didn't think of you'd end up probably here today. But there does need to be this sort of vision of what you're doing. The second part really is clarity, is what sort of holistic thinking around looking at all the different components. So. Who are the clients? Who are you trying to serve? What are the products? What are all the logistics associated with it? And the getting the business model, as it were, around that correct. And then, thinking about obviously how you finance it. But it's getting the business model correct first.
Doesn't that cause me to take my original mission statement and sort of move up the BOP to things that are less risky, more financeable?
No, not at all. The issue is, though, how do you grow and then have a graceful exit that also maintains the mission? If I give you another example from when I was in Peru, I called on a bank there called Edificar. Edificar was started by CARE, I think it is, as an MFI, and it grew up, and it serves the sort of bottom of the pyramid. Now, it has grown into a very significant organisation now, and it's been exited and sold to one of the major banks, BCP, in Peru. But BCP are keeping it, in that segment, providing products and services in that segment, to actually still bring people into the underbanked, into the banking system. So it's actually stayed very much, hasn't gone up market, it's actually stayed in that segment. So it's a question of how one migrates over time.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Yep. And I'll ask for some questions if you have them burning.
I think this relates to the question of people again. I think one of the questions, why do you do what you do? That should be the main question. Why do people get involved in this? Let's say preventing mission drift is really people. If the people are doing this for the right reasons, I think that's the best way to prevent mission drift. And also by selecting the staff, I think that's the thing you're looking for. You're really looking for people that share the mission. And if that's well secured, then I think, this is the best way to prevent this going up into better earning revenue segments. I think that's crucial.
And Jasper, what's missing in business plans that you see? What hasn't been as carefully thought through for what you need?
What's not missing?
If I need to describe my business in a way that you understand, what am I not doing?
I think what's missing most is that it's everything relates to everything. So and that's really you sometimes have really interesting components, but okay, then you look at another part of the business plan and there's no relationship between the two, and especially when you look at the plan. The market and everything, the whole description, and then you look at the financials. Sometimes you really wonder: is this the same business plan, or has this been done by two people that don't know each other and are just sitting in different rooms? It's really everything relates to everything. So really, from the figures, you should be able to sort of get a feeling of the business plan, and from the content, you should get a feeling for the figures. And if there's no relationship between those two, and if there's no relationship between the market and the sales you expect, and let's say the niche your product is filling, it just doesn't make sense. But this is the main thing. It's just make it a complete and understandable. Just take somebody by the hand and lead him or her through your business plan, and well, then the figures are just sort of laying down what you have described before. If that's clear, then
I'm going to throw my advice on the table as having been in this space for a long time. The business model should not be an Excel chart on page 65 of the business plan in little tiny numbers. You should populate the business plan with the numbers, and it connects. There's a story that you're telling in narrative form and in numerical form. And I see so many business plans where it's this wonderful narrative, and then I can't read the financials at the back, plus they don't make any sense anyway. You've really got to integrate, if you're describing this machine of this business or this enterprise in different forms, and populate the story with the numbers. I want to get to some questions here. Where's the mic?
I'm struck, Andrea, about it was fascinating. I used to be in your role and working for social enterprise and calling up certain people whose names shall remain nameless and going, why won't you finance us? Come be like us. And I've come now to work at a financial institution where I've learned a great deal about core competency and role. And what strikes me, having been on, in many ways, both ends of the spectrums, and I want to be very clear, I'm not a banker, and Philip is saying yes, I would agree with that. But what I do have is perspective, and what has struck me is that continuum, that conveyor belt is fundamentally broken. And I think what's interesting is and it's a phrase that's used, but I don't know that it's used the right way, the social capital markets. That is not a clean and easy place. And I wonder if the panel might sort of discuss, and others in the room, a bit about that, because banks are banks. Banks aren't trying to do things that social enterprises always need. What I've learned is that there are banks and partners of banks, many of whom are in this room, that help banks do things that they can't do. And I think that's starting to develop, and I love sort of your observations, the people on the panel and others in the room who are starting to see that handoff is starting to happen more and more. That's just my observation and a bit of a question.
One of the things we've encountered is that we often have the need for a line of credit, and actually, strangely enough, a line of credit for social enterprises is much harder to get than almost anything else. And strangely, because you would never look for a line of credit unless you had a contract to go with it. But it's a really, really difficult thing, or we have found it so. And so you end up really going to people who might at one time have given you a grant and saying, would you consider this? And so you're sort of just going to places other than banks, because we did go to banks in the first place and ask for them and whether they'd be considered. But the reaction to that was so it was sort of treated almost like a joke, are you kidding? So you end up going to some very unusual places to ask for money and saying, we'll pay you interest, of course, and well, we don't normally do this. Well, let's think about how we could do it. So you find other people, other businesses with money that are maybe willing to do that. But it's a very unusual route to take. But it's very hard for banks and social enterprises, I think, to talk together, actually.
Kevin Lynch with the Social Enterprise Alliance in the U.S., which is the membership organization for social enterprises. One of the things in the conversation that struck me as a little bit odd to me is thinking of social enterprise. It seems like it was sort of framed as social enterprise as a financing mechanism. And I think if you think about social enterprise as a financing mechanism, it's probably going to fail, because if you think about a nonprofit going out and starting a business for the sake of just making earned income for the organization, there's probably a lot of people out there who could start that same business and be more successful with their expertise than a nonprofit could be. So really, in our definition anyway of social enterprise, it's really a mission that accomplishes the mission of a business that accomplishes the mission that happens to be monetizable. And if it's thought of that way, then it's really a point of leverage for a funder, because a funder now is saying, I want to somehow fund your mission and the delivery of your mission. But now that funding that I'm providing into the delivery of the mission is now being leveraged by the income that is coming in the marketplace through the monetization of the mission, and it makes my grant dollar or any other dollar go farther if the mission and the business are tied together in the earned income idea rather than just as a financing mechanism.
The monetization of the mission. Yeah. I think half of us are like, absolutely, and half of us are like, that sounds terrible. But no, it's great. I mean, we have business terms and business people and social terms and social and mission-oriented people coming together and trying to figure this out in the same space. It's a great process, but we have to learn to speak each other's languages. We have to learn to describe social enterprises as businesses, which some of us bristle at, actually. Please.
I have a question about franchises. In fact, this comes to Jack's question about infrastructure. Once you've identified, thank you. Once you've identified an interesting way of coping with a dysfunction, such as Reuters has done in dealing with transport, logistics, and health, you look at, could you take that same idea to another sector, and does that make it independently more attractive to funders? For instance, if there were a Writers for Agriculture, it would fit an enormous gap in the infrastructure for food and agriculture, which lacks transport and logistics massively. So in a sense, could you imagine going to a funding body and saying, listen, we have a track record, we know how to do it with this end point, but the same infrastructural needs. So can we make a franchise of that where it's not the same people, but it's the same business model? Or in fact, is it more attractive to scale the same institution into another domain? From a funder's point of view, which model looks best to you?
Can I take it? Yeah, I think, crucial in this is the people who have sort of shown that this works. So if I would have to choose, I would definitely go for the second option. So the people that have proven that they are successful in building this and bringing it to the skill it has, then just saying, okay, this is a franchise, let's find somebody who could do this. I would be very worried that you would not find the right person or right team to run it. So it would have my preference separated, so I would really separate the two, but see if the original team could also do this one, because that would give me a lot of comfort that they could do the job. But I'm not sure what Philip feels about it.
Bankers are boring. So basically, we like stability and sort of no surprises. So once the business gets boring, then it's interesting. Basically.
Which is less boring to you, vertical or horizontal expansion? Which is less boring to you? Vertical or horizontal, to Richard's question.
It doesn't matter, because it's really where's the core competency here. I mean, in the past, a long time ago, I was financing McDonald's hamburger franchises, for instance, and there, I mean, you're looking at, it's a marketing thing, where is it and all that sort of thing. But in financing, we're relying on the sort of McDonald's supervision here in terms of what's their daily bun variance or whatever it is that they, literally, in terms of monitoring of it, that then makes it, because there's the control mechanism, there are boundaries around it that ensure that in terms of stability, that we're actually looking for something that's going to deliver. I mean, what we're after at the end of the day is quite simply, going back to the business plan, that it's going to deliver within a certain risk tolerance, what people say it is going to deliver. And if I could just touch on this question of, when is something financeable or not, it does come back to what people's vision is of the business, because before this role, I was looking after project finance. And in project finance, you start off with literally, nothing. And you end up, with a power plant or with a mine or with a toll road or whatever it is. But you're getting to an end state where you believe that it is refinanceable. And that is really, because in terms of getting, one of the problems that we have in terms of looking at names is with a number of NGOs. So there are a number that I would say, I believe they're bankable. And I would lend, I would say, okay, from a credit standpoint, I like the management, I like the, etc. But it's no use our lending to them if no one else is going to lend to them. Because how do we get repaid? Because at the end of the day, unless you actually shrink businesses and liquidate them, there is a need for that funding to be there. So it's not only a question of convincing me. It's a question of when I'm looking at it. It's a question of looking at how are others going to refinance that. Now we have had some entities. I mean, we had a microfinance, a new microfinance institution that set up in India that had this long-term objective. That miraculously, I don't know how it did it, but after 6 months, it actually had a CRISIL, which is an S&P in India, rating report already done, on this entity, because it had this vision of growth. It wanted to bring investors on board early, so it actually was going out and putting in place, the things that were necessary to actually get this refinancing down the road.
Okay, let's have some more questions. Andrew. And sorry, this is for recording for posterity, so we have a mic here. Great.
I just want to bring together a couple of points that are going here. The first point is I think, and I'm in the funder area, and I just don't think we're doing a good job. I think there are ways to come together as funders. That's just my first point. But bring that down to an actual example.
Why aren't you doing a good job?
We're just not doing a good job of communicating and figuring out where each of our individual niches are and how we can actually come together around a specific project. I think we work, this is a general statement, we work very high up and we're very focused and everything like that. But when an opportunity comes up, and I'm saying most of this just because we're in a unique position because we're outside of government. We're funded by the Canadian government, but we're outside, and we actually run ourselves like a venture capital, not-for-profit, outside of government. We're being flexible and nimble. So when we try to collaborate with USAID or DFID and others and everything like that, and we have great relationships with them, but it's always tough because it's hard to get around to be able to move quickly. And in the social enterprise space, you kind of have to move quickly. And so this is some of the challenges that we're having. But to bring this point down to, I think, Richard, right, your point, which is really interesting, is how can we take the Riders for Andrea? We had a great conversation, and I started to think about this too, about the franchise. And so we're in the business of $100,000 around bold ideas. These are just high risk, high ideas. You know what? Chances are 80% of them will not move forward. But what about taking a chance at our level around sticking on an agricultural side? So one side of your bikes have the health, another side have the agriculture, fruit, or whatever.
Thanks for raising this, Richard.
No, but then teaming up with more the larger base funders who are able to take it to scale to say, let's just try this experiment. Try a little tiny environment, see if it works. And what's the worst case scenario? It's $100,000. I'm willing to take that risk on $100,000 to see if we're able to open up and sort of deconstruct how things are actually done. So overall point is I think we have to do a bigger job, and I think a colleague over there is sorry, I forget your name, but you're kind of moving towards that point where we have to be able to come together and communicate a lot better.
So Andrea's really busy, and so I would hope the financing partners would figure this out. And don't leave it to the social entrepreneur to figure it out. Philip?
I say that quite a number of NGOs, I mean, Willie's not in the room, but Root is an example, are structured to do that. So that there's a sustainable trade fund, which is if you like, the normal business as usual, commercial lending. There's a frontier investments, which is targeted at bringing on board, new crops, new geographies, understanding, doing new things, so that they can then graduate and become mainstream. And then there's a capability building side, and the funding, for all those three streams is different. So the capability is based on grants. The frontier is based on very soft money, and the sustainable is sustainable. And
that really helps me understand the kind of the breakdown of the different types of the parts of the business, the risks of the business, the ability to finance the different parts of the business. That's really helpful to understand that. You were jumping in there, Jasper, were you?
Yeah, well, I must say that we have the same issue. I think it would work much better if we would better know each other, would sort of, maybe plot where everybody is. So what would be a natural sequence of institutions or partners to take over from one another. I must say in the Netherlands we have set up quite a nice structure. So there we have social enterprise that we support, and we sort of team up with other funders quite naturally. So one takes the lead. Unfortunately, at this moment, it's most of the cases still us who take the lead, but I think the others will come and will take over in other cases where we can follow. But there it starts to come, so that we just have a group of like 5 or 6 funders that team up, one with a little bit more risk appetite, one with a little bit less, who would come in a little bit later. But that works actually quite well. And I must say it also gives us comfort as a funder that others will come in. We know that they can stick around a little bit longer than we want to stick around. But internationally, I think much more could be done. So
you can go to a social financing conference every other week somewhere on the globe. You can go from WEF to SOCAP to Skoll. So why isn't this? I mean, you guys are together all the time. Why isn't this figured out?
We don't drink enough coffee.
Let's get this solved. No, what's the hang-up, Graham? Like, why isn't this getting solved faster?
Because we haven't actually built the infrastructure. One of the things that came out of the influencers and enablers panel yesterday on this funders finance track is that we're really in the nuts and bolts phase, in my view, in building out these things that work. It's not pretty, it's not sexy, but it makes the difference. And I think it's incumbent upon us as donors who have the capital and actually recognize that these constraints exist to get together and invest in it. And informal syndication is happening more and more. So that experience is this experience that we've shared with Skoll, with groups like Root and others. So it's happening in these little clusters, but how do we create a market information system that's not just philanthropy based, mind you, that it transfers into the softer capital, that transitions into the more commercial capital, that gives people a line of sight where the opportunities are. I think that it's possible. It can be done.
I think that also, I mean, this isn't the first time we've thought about, Riders for Health has thought about how we use our core competence to benefit other development areas, for example, agriculture. But really, it comes down to the fact that we still have so much work to do in the health space, so much learning to do about how you link with ministries of health and so on, that is such a big challenge that it leaves very little room for other things. But I do think that one of the things that holds an organisation like Riders for Health back is not so much the capital to do your work on the ground, but actually your core funding. And you're all the time using all your energy to do that. If we didn't have to do that, we'd be able to think of how we would develop a new core competence area working with Riders for Agriculture, where because you'd have to think of new business models. You wouldn't be able to take the Riders for Health model working with ministries of health and just plonk it down in with Riders for Agriculture. You'd have to think of different business models. So I think that it's not just it's a sort of bandwidth question in terms of how you're trying to work really hard and focus on developing for health. But you could do it if you weren't struggling so hard all the time just to keep your core funding in place. It's just one of the things that sucks all the energy out of all the social enterprises, I think.
And offer a solution. Because of this problem, I observed that the good models like yours did not go to big scale because you're always firefighting. Yeah. I've created a BOP hub, base of pyramid hub, which is to take the scaling across sector. So just like agriculture going into transportation, water going into sanitation, into health, and this will take also a lot of your back office stuff that you can outsource to us. And to bring the alignment of different type of funding in its sequence during its phases in its life cycle, so that we solve all these problems. We will do all the dirty work for you, and will not be a rock star. We'll make you a bigger rock star.
So you'll pay for capacity building as well?
Yeah, we'll charge.
Okay.
And the donor will pay, and the social enterprise doesn't have to pay.
Okay.
Maybe the donor is also the bank. There's some technical assistance.
Other questions, Mr. Coleman?
Edwin, you want? Okay.
This is Barry Coleman from Riders for Health.
I am. That's true. I'm from Riders for Health.
Half of the team.
a little bit of the rest of the team, but there's a dichotomy always in this discussion about the kind of assumed incompetence in financial and other matters of the social enterprises, and the assumed competence of financial institutions, for example, which I must say I have noticed. GT Bank is not a Gambian bank, it's a huge Nigerian bank, and I forget which, I think it's Johannesburg. You walk to your plane or off it for an hour and a half, seeing GT, they own the airport or something, and in Heathrow it's HSBC everywhere. This is a big bank, and they know how to add up, I think. I don't know, I'm not sure. But it isn't, we mustn't have that conversation all the time that way. I mean, for example, as Andrew said, we employ 400 people, about 390 of whom, it seems to me, are accountants. I mean, the thing we do, we have really great accountants, but the thing we do is to run a lot of vehicles so they don't break down, however difficult the conditions. And this means you can have what we call transport asset management, because you can manage and protect the asset. That's why GT Bank lends us the money, because our track record is in having vehicles running incredibly difficult conditions where nobody else can do it, so they don't break down. So the bank looks at that and they say, yeah, it is an asset, and actually after the length of time you've run them, it's still an asset. It's not a piece of junk behind some hospital. So for each of those vehicles, we have an unbelievable number of transactions. Somebody has to get a part from somewhere, it's in Japan, and it's got a number that long. And the thing about, one I've noticed about finance and other things, when you come to digits, they really have to be in the right order. The digits, very important. They can't be all jumbled up and take 17 digits and any old how, no. And when this comes to parts and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and somebody sends you a part that is kind of represented by a jumbled up bag of digits and it's the wrong part, you'll be a very disappointed person, and then your fleet will fall apart and nobody will finance you because you've just got a pile of junk. So we are, in fact, extremely competent at what we do. Nobody else in the world does this. Hertz couldn't do it. Avis couldn't do it. No one can do this. It's so complicated. I don't tell people that usually. Please don't. Oh, it's really easy. Here's a good example. You give me the money. You can have $100,000 worth of transport from us because we count this in kilometers and we know exactly how much they cost. So we'll sell you a kilometer like we do to a Ministry of Health. You look like a shifty guy to me, so you may not pay the money, but the Ministry of Health always do, and everybody tells, don't work with African banks. They never pay. Oh, yes, they do. So everything you're told about this is generally speaking wrong. So but it is, Richard, and you must never listen to anything anybody says, especially not you. So it's just not a good idea. It's a bad idea, and nothing changes if you believe everything everybody tells you all the time. So I think we should have a slightly different discussion where we share things a bit more and we don't face each other across a table and assume that the social enterprise is in some way incompetent or they can't even add up, because that isn't true. And it's not just us. All sorts of social enterprises really can add up, and they can do things, therefore, on a massive scale. Think of Joe, for example, Graham Vickers. What a huge scale they do things. Nobody else in the world can do that. That's why they have to go around doing impossible things in India and then in Africa. This is not financial income. Well, actually, it's Joe, but it's not generally financial incompetence. I mean, it's just incredible competence in all sorts of things. So when we have panels, I think we just, have a more imaginative approach and not have that dichotomy all the time. So that's it, really. I came down here because I couldn't get any attention whatsoever in the back of Alex's head. None at all.
I'm watching you from there, Barry.
Well, generally I'm a back of the hall guy, as you can see. So I had to come down the front, so break a habit. But I saw how well Jack was doing, so I thought I'd go sit near Jack.
I appreciate your comments, Barry. Thank you. Edwin, you have a mic, so go for it.
And so I'd like to build off of that because, I feel like we've been very explicit about the need for talent and the need for development on the social enterprise side, the need for the relationships to really start with, them knowing their mission and so on and so forth. So we've been talking about the fact that the people matter on the social enterprise side, but I want to turn it around and say the people matter as well on the funder side. We haven't been explicit about saying, let's put the funders back on the hot seat. And let's say, back to what Graham was saying, this idea of this previous panel on influencers and enablers, the fact that the funders could be enablers, but this relates to people within the funder community. Is there a way for us to not only be enablers, but then to pivot and say, if we're capable of creating some of these financial structures that will enable the social enterprises to be able to then get the appropriate capital that they need when they need it, then we need to be able to sell that to our peers, to be able to say, we funders then should be able to then turn into the influencers. So be the early adopters, the early enablers that will then allow other funders to follow suit. So I think that the conversation has to be a two-way street. You can't just say it's about the people within the social enterprise and then it's the banks or it's the foundations. I mean, it's the people within the banks and within the foundations that need to own up to the fact that they need to also be able to push upon their peers to be able to push the frontiers.
And we certainly have some very forward-leaning bankers in the room, and I appreciate your presence here and your involvement with what we're doing here. So sorry you have to own the entire industry, but so be it. But
and currently we call them entrepreneurs, right? Within these larger institutions. Well, let's get these entrepreneurs to be the mainstream parts of those institutions. Let's get the enablers to be the influencers, then turn back to be the enablers. One of the key takeaways from that panel was that it's a continuum. We're not always just trapped in one role. We can be both, right?
Mitchell from OPIC.
May I very quickly?
Yeah, please.
Just talk very quickly about, Richard raised the issue of franchising, and I see what he's saying at a sort of macro level about splitting off and running a big organization alongside to do agriculture. But one of the conversations that the social entrepreneurs are having about to do with scale is to think about franchising their model as it, for example, as Riders for Health exists, placing it, asking people in African countries, would they like to do a franchise of that? And everybody's talking in social enterprise about this as an issue of scaling. But really, when you think about it, the conversation about social enterprise in this area, in the Skoll Forum, gets more and more sophisticated, and at the same time in Africa, for example, that is not flowing over to Africa. So you start conversations in Africa at a very different level than you start here. So it's on our shoulders to educate people about social enterprise in Africa. So it's just Riders for Health in our area doing that. And I think there is another thing that we all should be doing as a group, is making sure that in developing countries, people know about social enterprise. What is it? Why would they do a franchise? Where are they going to get the capital from? People talk very airily about franchising their model in an area where nobody even understands what franchising is, let alone where are they going to get the money from? How are they going to do it? What's the benefit to them? And we're really talking about something that where there really is hope, and we really should be trying to have this conversation in developing countries so that they can think themselves about franchising, not us imposing it on somebody. But we don't really know what we're all talking about when it comes to doing that in a resource-poor environment.
Great. Mitchell, did you have a comment?
My comment is that I love the Skoll Forum, and I've come here for 4 years. And OPIC as an organization, and me personally, have worked over time, many years, to bring entities big, like Citibank, into fields like microfinance, or at least help them on their journey by sharing their risk, so that should there be losses, we take half some percentage, it's by term. And we can do that for this field. We can create a pooled vehicle. Part of our challenge, as you heard Philip say so articulately, and in so many conversations one-off about entities such as riders and some other Skoll awardees and other, name. There's the cook stove people and the solar light people, and there are all these people, and they're doing these wonderful things. Those with a cash flow generating model, or at least enough earned revenue that you can see a cash flow to which one can lend. But if bankers are traditionally looking for three sources of repayment, so frequently social enterprises don't have buildings or that third source. We need to replace that with credit enhancement. And we can't look to the Skoll Foundations and the Rockefellers to just be there in increasing amounts to grow the ones that have already been identified and proven larger, as well as bring along new ones. So what we have to do is band together and get the Canadian money and a little Skoll money and some of the funders' money. And ultimately, it's the other people who aren't participating's money to come in to enable the risk-taking layers, and the risk will be diminished by virtue of aggregating proven social enterprises together. And from thence, we can lend the money together.
So we're almost out of time, unfortunately, but there's a question right behind me I want to make sure I cover. So,
Alex, so I want to build off of Barry's comment. It's really interesting listening to social entrepreneurs who are doing things that have never been done before, and we're applying the same financial instruments that we always use. So there's a muscle memory for debt and equity, and those may not be the right instruments, especially when you're looking at social enterprises who have seasonality of cash flow from earned income models. So I think we need to be more innovative on what kinds of instruments we use, and one of the things that we're looking at is a demand dividend with some of the earned income models, which are about 60% of the social enterprises we've dealt with, both for-profit, non-profit, and hybrid, where you pay a percentage of free cash flow. So you're not locked into servicing a debt if you have a tough quarter or a couple tough quarters because of a drought, for example, if you're in the agriculture business. So these are things that I'd love to hear the panel respond to, how you're thinking about innovating new instruments, how you test pilot them. And there's, of course, risk in new instruments, but if we're not going to be innovative on the side of funding and do something different, I don't know if it's going to work when the social entrepreneurs are doing exercises that have never been done before.
Great. Thank you. Thoughts?
It's fine to be innovative, and where there are lots of examples of innovative structures, but at the end of the day, we're after a stable revenue stream and basically some certainty around getting principal back. So it's really, you can't change, obviously the underlying risk characteristics of, you have a business, whatever it is, if it's in agriculture or it's making things or it's Riders for Health, there is a business profile to that. And you basically have to address that risk. Now it may be, as Mitchell pointed out, that what is required is you can cut up the risk, and you can have, in terms of a first loss and things like that in terms of structure, but it doesn't take it away. So yes, we can be innovative, and as I mentioned before, that basically when enterprises are developing, when they're normally not net revenue positive, because in terms of revenue to expense, a lot of entities, including when you get to even BRAC or something in Bangladesh, revenue doesn't equal expense, because it's moved to something like 80%, I think now. Because it has businesses which are grant funded. What is required is to not only tailor the financing, but also tailor the organisation around. As I mentioned before with this route example, well, it's very similar with some of the microfinance institutions that we deal with, where there's microfinance over here, there's a consulting arm here, and there's a livelihood arm there. And they're funded differently by different colours of money, which Alex was talking about earlier on. And I think with, Riders, as Riders grows, I think you were saying, I think Gambia, you've now said, okay, Gambia's sustainable. So I mean, I think there's a sort of, we're going to qualify countries up and so that they're sustainable. So it needs to be linked to, I mean, the financial innovation needs to be linked to the actual business and making the business, sustainable. But I mean, there are all sorts of, obviously one can have all sorts of different bells and whistles on it. If I could just add one other point in terms of, Mitchell, this question of risk support. Because there is risk support, as we had with example from Skoll originally, in terms of supporting Riders for Health, where basically, from a banking standpoint, because it's new, because it's innovative, because it's whatever, it doesn't have a stable cash flow, we need support, as a way out of the credit to make sure there's some certainty around getting our principal back.
Sorry,
but
I thought beg your pardon.
No, sorry. Well, as I say, as businesses grow, I mean, from our standpoint, one of the problems is a lot of these businesses are non-investment grade. And non-investment grade, under the regulatory environment that we have, require large amounts of capital. So one of the issues is to grow or to support the sector. One does need, support from the OPICs of this world, to actually make it a viable business from a banking standpoint as well.
But doesn't it depend on the sources of your funding? I think in your case...
No, it's nothing to do with it. Don't do that. It's basically, it's the capital required against it.
No, I know. But what I think is, if you look at this innovation, I think it's really a matter of, okay, where does your money come from? I think as a bank, you can experiment, you can do some sort of innovation, but it's limited. You cannot innovate up to anything, because you just have a responsibility to repay the people that put their money into your bank accounts. In our case, we get money from 3 charity lotteries. They allow us to really risk the money, so we can really do experimental stuff. I would love to share ideas on innovation. We try all kinds of stuff. We try loans that let's say we extend a 100,000 loan. You only have to repay 80,000 if you meet the social goals that we set together. You pay 60,000 if you exceed them. You pay the full 100 if we're not pleased with the impact. We have done guarantees to try to bring banks in to provide a guarantee and make it reduce over time to get sort of more of an exposure for the bank and sort of build a relationship. We have repayable grants. We have convertible grants. We're really trying all kinds of stuff to sort of adapt to the social enterprises. And I think our sources of money allow us to do that. And I think from a bank you can expect some level of innovation, but don't expect them to go wild and test all kinds of crazy stuff.
You do also need people like Andrew who are willing to do something, from the social enterprise point of view, willing to do something from an incubator point of view. And so I do think that if you have the latitude to be able to test something and with the possibility that it might not work, I think, as Jasper's saying, I think that is very helpful for an organisation like ours, because we're all working with huge amounts of risk, and so in every part of our business, not just on the money side, on all sides. So just to have the safety, as it were, of testing something on the model that Andrew's suggesting is really, really helpful.
There are lots of innovative structures that can be put together to support social businesses. I mean, one example is with Habitat for Humanity, where they've set up a new fund called Microbuild, which is aimed to fund microfinance institutions where they're providing technical assistance to build housing, to foster housing programs. And there, they basically had a donor investor that was willing to pledge collateral, off which we issued a standby letter of credit as the equity portion to OPIC, and OPIC then funded the fund. So there are examples of doing things like that. But I think there is a gap between when we're non-commercial and when we're commercial, and there's a bit of a chasm between it. And unfortunately, this gets a bit fudged. And if we were in the sort of theoretical world, you'd say, here's a risk return and here's a nice curve, or whatever. But it doesn't work like that. There's basically, it's very much, it's in this box or it's in that box, or that's the trouble. There's I think a chasm or whatever in the middle of it.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you all for participating. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. I'm sure we will all sort this stuff out in the next year, and we'll see you in a year. Thank you.